About BranchCache, designing BranchCache infrastructures, WSV 324, just make sure everyone's in the right session. My name is Manish Kalra. I'm a senior product manager with Microsoft, specifically working on some of our networking technologies, one of which is BranchCache. So what we're going to do today is, here's an agenda that I put together, talk about the problem, why we built BranchCache, the different solution modes. Some of you have asked me questions today and actually through the week that how does BranchCache work? What are the different ways? What if I don't want a server? I don't want to put servers in my branches. So there's different options that we could do. There's one that requires a server and one that works basically without clients, because not every branch requires a server, depending on how many people you have there. Talk about specifically what protocols we support. BranchCache is not designed to be a solution of all needs. We looked at particular scenarios and built it for that. And in some cases, it may meet your needs, and in some cases, may not. And in other cases, you have the ability to extend the platform, and we'll talk about how you do that, where the APIs are located, and where your dev organizations can go to look at this and maybe build add-ons. And if you do that, I'd love to hear what you've actually done with BranchCache. Talk about deployment and management, and then talk about how we actually build all this content identification together. So, the problem background. At the end of the day, why did we do this? A lot of organizations have head offices and, of course, expand out to branches. Now, the thing with expanding out to branches is, well, you got to put in a WAN link, and WAN links are expensive. They may be cheap in certain areas of the geography and very expensive in others. And what happens is, well, organizations, especially today, are saying, where should we cut costs? And a lot of cost cutting always starts with IT. What can you guys cut? I don't know how many people in this room have received that question. That, hey, do we have to cut some servers? Can we cut people? Can we cut WAN links? Things aren't going so well. So if you have to start cutting stuff, maybe you have to utilize your resources a lot better. So this is fine, if you have one branch, but then what happens is organizations are still growing. They might have more than one branch. They start growing, WAN link costs start adding up. You add a branch, you add another, and each one of these WAN links has a cost. And what we're trying to do is help you manage those costs with a platform. The platform's Windows Server 2008 R2, and then there's a feature in there called BranchCache. So we're delivering something in platform to help you so you don't have to go buy something else. It doesn't make sense to say, Mr. Administrator, I need you to cut my costs. Okay, I'm going to go buy something to go cut your costs. So I'm going to cut WAN costs, but buy something else. So we want to deliver something in platform to help you. As those costs are going up, people are adding branches and branches and branches, and what happens is a lot of organizations now have this huge infrastructure, global infrastructure, that costs a lot of money, right? It might be cheap to get a WAN link in New York City or in Seattle, where I'm from, but what does it cost when you have to do it in Canada, in Toronto, or in Europe, or in parts of Asia, where you can't get MPLS links, or you just have to get a 512K link, and you have to maximize its usage. And that's what we're going to talk about, how we can help. So let's start with how BranchCache actually operates, the two solution modes. There are two options that BranchCache that we deliver with. One is called distributed cache mode. The other one is hosted cache mode. The whole reason we did two different modes, and we get a lot of questions why you did this. Well, there's a lot of offices where people do not want to put servers in. It's a sales office. It's got 5 people in it. I am not going to go buy a server just for BranchCache to put for a sales office of 5 people. But then I've got an office for about 50, 60 people. They don't move. They're always there. But they're my regional support center for the sales force. Well, you know what? It might make more sense to have a server there. So we give you the option to say, you know what? BranchCache will work with clients only, where each client actually turns into the cache. So they cache data. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or I'll centralize the cache in a server, and all the clients will actually go up and get it. What's the real difference in the two? Distributed cache. recommended for branches without any infrastructure. So you already have clients there, you don't have a server there, you don't want to put a server there. So perfect solution for you. Easy to deploy. All you have to do is enable BranchCache through a GPO. That's it. In your data center, you say, BranchCache, turn it on, yes. What mode? Distributed mode. GPU update, done. Now your machines in your client branch office are enabled for BranchCache. The only issue with it, though, there are two pieces of drawback. The cache availability decreases with laptops that go offline. So the way distributed cache mode works is if you have 5 laptops, well, each one of them is holding portions of the cache. So what happens is laptop A has some data, laptop B needs that data. Well, it gets it from A while A is there. 5 o'clock hits, A goes home. Guess what? Cache went with him. So now laptop B has to re-download that data. So your availability of caching is very limited based on the number of people that are actually in the office. Number 2, subnet limited. Because of the way BranchCache operates with a multicast broadcast for distributed cache mode, it will not cross subnets. Now, if you have a branch office that has multiple subnets, well, then we cross over to doing hosted cache mode. We don't go across subnet for distributed cache mode. Now, hosted cache mode designed for larger offices, all right? So you have a lot of people there. You don't want to do distributed cache mode when there's 50, 60, 100 people, everyone's broadcasting. Hey, do you have this file? Yeah, I've got it. Do you have this file? Yeah. You're going to have all kinds of multicast traffic happening all over the place. So you know what? Let's just have everyone go to one server to get that data. Number 2, centrally stored. So what does that mean about availability now? No one's going to sit there and say, 5 o'clock, hey, I'm going to pack up the server now and go home. I'm going to lug this 1U unit out and bring it back tomorrow. So that makes availability as high. Of course, then the main thing about it is because it's cross-subnet, it enables it for the whole branch. So if you have a couple of floors, if you have a couple of areas, workshop area all over the place, you just need one server. So these are the basic differences of why you could go with one environment with just Windows 7 clients or a hosted environment with a Windows server and the Windows 7 clients. Now, which do you choose? These are some really basic guidelines that we've put together. Now, www.branchcache.com has a lot of documentation. One of the pieces of documentation you should look at is the BranchCache Design Guide, and this is right out of there. Now, these are basic guidelines, not necessarily something that might work for you, but for a branch office that contains less than 100 users and does not have any local servers, use distributed cache mode, and I gave you the reasons why. If you have more than 100 users, you don't want that type of traffic all over the place. Machines multicasting, saying, hey, do you have a file? And you'll understand what happens, why. We'll go through that in a minute. For BranchCache, for a branch office, either single subnet or multiple subnets that contains less than 100 users but also contains a local server. So a server's already there. You don't have to invest in infrastructure. You may already have a file server there. Use hosted cache mode because you already have the infrastructure. You may be in the process of upgrading your infrastructure. You might be saying, hey, time to upgrade to Windows Server 2008 R2, did my data center, now I'm going to go out and do my branch offices. So yeah, just turn on hosted cache mode, and we'll talk about that, how you turn it on. Very simple process. And of course, if you have multiple subnets that you need to support in your branch environment, you have to do hosted cache mode, or you'll have different subnetted versions of distributed cache all housing the same data. So there's no point in doing that. Number one question that always comes up is, what do I need for BranchCache? This is a pretty thorough list because we've got all different types of SKUs and at the end of the day. But what you need, Windows 7 Client, Enterprise, or Ultimate, number one. Those are the only supported versions of BranchCache. And I'm going to put an asterisk on there because we support Vista for one particular scenario, and I'll get into that. But it's only for that one scenario, and that's for bits download. But generally, all the scenarios I'm going to talk about, other than bits download for update services, Windows 7, Enterprise, or Ultimate. Now, there's two things you need in BranchCache. You need a hosted cache server or a content server. Content server is the definition we use for where the data is coming from. So is it your file server? Is it your distribution point? Is it your SharePoint site? That has to be the content server, and that can be basically any version of Windows Server 2008 R2. Now, there's specific installs that are not supported. So if you do Windows Server 2008 R2 Enterprise Core install with Hyper-V, it's not supported. If you do it with Data Center, not supported. If you do standard, not supported. I missed that one. And of course, the hosted cache is basically Enterprise Edition, Windows Server 2008 R2 Enterprise Edition and above. So basically, Enterprise Edition, Data Center Edition, if you are using Itanium, is the only supported operating system for the hosted cache, and that's what sits in the branch. Sorry, did you have a question? I didn't know. Okay. So, how does this work? So I'm going to go through a little scenario on how a distributed cache works. What happens when a user comes in? The way BranchCache works is it takes data, and in that data, it creates these hashes. And it's those hashes, the generation of those hashes, and the transmission of those hashes which saves the bandwidth usage. Now, BranchCache transmits the hashes, but hash generation first has to happen. So the way BranchCache works when it kicks into play is actually on the third access of a file. Now what happens is you have a cold server like this, as an example. You have a user in a branch, and you have a server in the data center, and there's a new file that's just gone up. It's the sales file. And you're going to have user A that's going to come into his branch office and wants to download the actual sales file. Now what has to happen, the little animation here is not going to show this, but the hash has to be generated, and we're going to go through what the hash is. And after that hash is generated, then the file will actually get downloaded. Now there's tools you can use to pre-populate hashes, and we'll talk about that too. So what happens is we're going to make an assumption that there's a brand new sales file and the hash has been generated. So you got user A that comes into the office. He says, you know what? I need to get this file, the new sales quota file or whatever it is. And I'm going to go up to my site as I always do every day to get it. Now what's going to happen is the content server is going to say, hey, you know what? The hashes have been generated. I'm going to send you this ID file, the hash ID file. Take a look at it, because you know what? Maybe someone in your branch has this file. He's going to say, you know what? All right, I'm going to do a multicast broadcast for this ID. Does anyone out there have this file? And you know what? Because user A was the first one in the office, 7 a.m., he's the top sales guy, no one responded. He was broadcasting out to get a file based on an ID the content server said, no response. So now the computer, the Windows 7 client, comes back and says, hey man, no response. So you know what? Go back to the content server and now get the data. So now what's happened is he's the only guy in the office, first one in, hash got generated. Guess what? The file gets downloaded now. So he actually has to download the file because no one had it in the branch. So now he does the get of the data. What happens next is user 2 comes in, 9 a.m., slacker or whatever, I'm going to come in. I need to get that sales file too. But a couple of things have happened now between 7 and 9 a.m. Not that it takes 2 hours to generate a hash. Is now the user goes up to the data center and says, hey, I need my sales file too. Server says, hey, we already generated an ID. I'm going to send you an ID. Now you go on your broadcast, on your network, and see if someone will respond to your request for an ID. So now user B does a multicast broadcast and say, hey, I've got this ID, the hash. Does anyone here? All right, guys, sorry about that. I'll try to talk over. So it does a broadcast. Should I wait till she finishes? Have a great day, guys. All right. So user B now does this broadcast. I've got this hash ID. Who's got this file? Well, guess what? User A responds, hey, I know what that hash ID means. I got it already. Our hashes match up. So you know what? I'm going to respond to you that I have this file. So now user B goes to user A's cache, gets the file. So what happens is sends them over the data. So user B did not use any bandwidth to download the file. Now, very simplistic with 2 users. Multiply that by 10 users in office, 50 offices, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Now you see your bandwidth usage starts dropping. So very clear distinction I want to make. And we'll get into this too about WAN optimization. There's WAN optimization. We are not optimizing the WAN. We are not using the WAN. Big difference there. We use it on the first download, and then that's it. So there's no optimization. So you have to think about, do I want to optimize the WAN? Do I want to not use the WAN? 2 different ways of approaching it. So that's distributed cache mode. Now, hosted cache mode, fairly similar. Only difference is now the cache does not reside on the individual laptops. The cache is on the server. So let's go back to the same scenario. User A comes in the morning, looks for a file. Now, the content server sends down an ID because we pre-generated the hash. This does a unique, this time, instead of a multicast, it's a unicast broadcast that it does to its server. Because via GPO, it knows that there's a hosted cache server. It says, hey, you got this ID? I got this ID from the content server, and my GPOs tell me to look to you if you're going to respond to me. Hosted cache server doesn't really have anything because there's no response. So now the user goes back up and gets the data one more time. Gets the data and says, you know what? I've got this data. When I asked for the ID, you didn't respond to me. But now I've got this data, so I'm going to offer it to you, hosted cache server. Would you like to take this data from me? Hosted cache server says, I'm going to compare this ID that you're offering me. There is nothing in my cache that matches it, so I'm going to request it from you. So now I send back the hash to the user and say, please send me your data. Now all this stuff is happening really fast. And then my laptop, user A, puts it into the hosted cache. This is all transparent behind the scenes. User B, so the data goes into the hosted cache. User B shows up, does the exact same thing, goes up to get the sales file. Sales file, content server says, hey, here's a hosted ID. GPO says, go search the hosted cache server to see if that ID matches something locally, and guess what? This time it does. It says, hey, I'm looking for this ID. You already have the ID because user B did the download for me already. So I'll get it from you, and now I have the file. Now that's basically the same principle, almost the way distributed and hosted work. The main thing is the centralized cache. Are there any questions at this point? Sir. Yep. I'm going to answer how we do that. Oh, sorry. So let me see if I captured that. Sorry about that. If a request comes in to download a file, and correct me if I captured this wrong. If a request comes in to download a file, and that download has not happened because it's a fairly big file, and that download is happening, and a second request comes in to download the file, what happens? Correct? I'm going to answer that when we talk about how the actual content is split up. So, what is BranchCache? So this whole week, we've got a lot of questions about really what it is. Is it protocol? Is it WAN optimization? It's really an underlying platform that sits on Windows Server, comprised of 3 key things. The content server, a content server that's generating hashes or content information and delivering it to a client. The base underlying thing to take away from BranchCache, it sits beneath everything. So what that means is questions like, well, what about security? It's got no security mechanism in it because it honors the security you've already implemented. It's a feature in Windows Server 2008 R2. So we're not going to go create new security principles in BranchCache. Why not use the underlying foundation? Does it securely transmit data? Well, if you use SSL, it leverages SSL. Basically, we want to make this system transparent to you. You put it in, and you'll see it's very easy to turn on, and it honors whatever you have implemented. We don't want to make this job harder for you. So that's the key thing you have to take away. It's an underlying foundation. Now, where does it sit? We put BranchCache at the bottom and basically built support for two key protocols, SMB, HTTP. Why those two protocols? Well, we had to ship something, but what it was about was we went out and did research and said, okay, what are the main protocols that customers are using? And then the associated applications with those protocols. So what you have here is you have BranchCache. BranchCache ties into two protocols, SMB, HTTP. Now, those two protocols tie into applications. Office, a file copy, Explorer in the case of SMB, or SharePoint, bits, WSUS, SSECM tie into HTTP. And guess what? Since those applications tie into these protocols, which BranchCache supports, those applications are automatically now BranchCache enabled. What the little brown spots mean is we also have an area for you to extend BranchCache. So on the left of Office, well, if you want to put in something that leverages SMB, we've got an entire documented set on APIs on how to do this. If you talk to your dev organization, all this protocol tie-in stuff is documented on MSDN. Or you want to build a new protocol like FTP. You want to do something else to tie it into BranchCache. You can do that too. Or you want to do a third-party application that ties into one of these applications. We've documented that whole process for you. This is what we're delivering. We're making it extensible for you to take it further. And that's completely up to you. So what you do is you go on to MSDN. BranchCache is the solution name. The APIs are documented as peer distribution. So if you go to MSDN, you'll see all the protocols that BranchCache leverages to get the reads, the requests, the caching documented, so you can extend it further and take it beyond what we've done out of the box. Sir. I'm sorry, could you use the mic? Because I think they're recording this, so it'd be great if.
Is it on? Yeah, is there a plan to extend for Windows 2008 standard for server side and for Windows XP for enterprises, which doesn't seem to be anything that would kind of limit you from doing that, but?
The answer is no. No. From a client side, it's Windows 7 Enterprise, nothing backwards, except Vista, and that's going to be coming up soon for the bit stuff that I'm going to talk about. So no going back to XP. Standard Edition is supported for being the content server, but not the hosted cache server. That's Enterprise Edition. So no, we're not going to be going back and adding support for those two platforms that you mentioned. So how do we actually deploy this? BranchCache is deployed through an optional feature and role mechanism. So you go into Windows Server 2008, and actually I'll just switch over to that very quickly. So I've got my server manager here. You go in and install a feature called BranchCache. That's it. Install, you're done. You have BranchCache. If you have a web server, that's all you need to do. If you have a file server, you have to go in. Once you install BranchCache under features, you have to go into file services and install BranchCache for network files. So those are two things you need to do on the server side. Then what you need to do is set group policies. You can do a net shell command or you can do a group policy. I recommend doing a group policy because things start getting a little nasty if you do net shell commands. You don't know if someone else wrote one while you were out on vacation. At least with group policies, you can go back and check. Keeps it a little more organized and keeps it mostly probably within what you're doing for other things, leveraging group policies. If you want to do distributed cache, you use a group policy that says set branch cache distributed cache mode. And the answer is yes or no. GPU update, Windows 7 now clients use branch cache. That's it. Or you install a hosted cache in your branch and say set branch cache hosted cache mode, enter the fully qualified domain name, and it's set. Now on the server side, one thing you do want to do is you want to apply a certificate so it becomes a trusted server. So the clients know that this is a trusted environment that they're going to. There's two more policy settings that you can set. The first one is branch cache size on a hosted server. Default is 5% of what you have the disk. So 10 meg disk, 5% of 10 megs. Now that is the default when you turn this on. And right away you go in and do a net shell command and you can say increase it by megs if you want to use megs, percentage. So I want to say I want to use 20% or I want to use 500 gigs out of my terabyte. So you've got very flexible options on the size of the cache. One last thing that you also need to do when setting the branch cache policies, though, on the content server side is about a configuration setting called landman. It has to do with hash generation. The way branch cache can be enabled is it can be enabled on the whole server, so every single share on this server is going to be branch cache enabled, or one share, because I only want particular data being cached, and I want to control it. So it gives you the option to say all of the server, or I want to do it on a share basis. So talking about workloads now, giving you some ideas on where you can enable branch cache. So one is the way, when I go through these workloads, think about, hey, these are all different ways of that I use the technology today. I can combine everything moving forward into one cache for the branch instead of having multiple points. So for Configuration Manager and WSUS, you might have distribution points across your environment in every single branch environment. One option you could consider is move the distribution point to the data center, make that distribution point branch cache enabled, and guess what? All your patches now start getting put into the cache across your environment, one cache. Next option that you could do using the same cache, application virtualization. Is anyone looking at AppV, exploring it, things like that? No one? Oh, back there. So the thing with application virtualization, AppV, you need to have a staging server. So if you're using System Center Configuration Manager, you might have needed a distribution point, and now you need a staging server, and you need a staging share. So you've had two areas in the branch that you would have required. But AppV can be, branch cache can cache AppV streams. So that same cache now is caching your distribution point, SMS, System Center Configuration Manager, WSUS updates, and now your AppV streams also. So you've got one cache in that area. The thing that's really important that I didn't touch upon is the reason it makes management a little bit easier for you. You have everything, all your different areas going into one cache. You can control the cache. If you feel there's a security breach, something's going on, something's fishy, net shell, branch cache flush. Cache is wiped out. How could you do that in 1 second with, if you have a stream area, you've got a distribution point area, you might have a file server area, you'd have to individually do something. But net shell, SH, branch cache flush, all wiped out in an instant. And that's one of the advantages, having everything coming down to one centralized site. SharePoint. Number one workload for branch cache, SharePoint files, right? Don't want the same people coming down and downloading the same files and keeping them all over the place. So now we've got WSUS, SCCM, AppV streams, SharePoint files, all in the same cache area. Whoops. And file servers, just general files. I keep all my files on my content server, like in the example I used, the sales data. Well, guess what? All that stuff is coming down. So all these scenarios now are all coming down into one cache, leaving you one place to manage, not the 4 different areas you would have had separately. And from a security point of view, any data breach, any fishy stuff going on, run the flush command, your cache is wiped out. No data leakage. So what happens here? And sir, this answers your question about a big file being downloaded and someone else accesses the file. So you take content, whatever size of the content, let's just call it 1 gig. What we do to content now is we break up content. We break it up next into segments. Segments are broken up into 32 meg chunks, and of course 32 and whatever's left at the end. Why 32? That's the number we picked. There's no mathematical reasoning behind it. It could have been 28, it could have been 46. We picked 32. These are the units of discovery. So when you use the hash to find data, the computer is looking for 32 meg segments. It's not looking for a 1 gig file. That's how we go find data. The 32 megs are broken up into 64K blocks. These are the units of download. Now, why did we do this? Getting back to the gentleman's question, is user A starts downloading a file in 64K blocks. He gets to 250 megs out of 1 gig. User B starts downloading that same file, but guess what? The hash generation happened, and the file has already started downloading. So the user gets a hash, user B. User B goes and does a broadcast and says, does anyone have this hash? User A responds, yes, I have the hash. He doesn't tell him, I only have 250 megs out of 1 gig, because now that user B knows he has the hash, he goes out and looks for 32 meg segments of the file, not 1 gig of the file. He says, oh, you've got a bunch of 32 meg segments. You actually have 250 megs. I don't know that yet, but you've responded to my 32 meg request with a bunch of segments. Well, now I'm going to start downloading off of you in 64K blocks. So what's actually happening is files are going down this way, the user who's at 250 megs, and now files are going this way starting at 0 because we responded in 32 meg segments and downloading in 64K blocks. Does that answer your question? Cool. Then what we do with those blocks is we compress them even further, and that's what we use to generate the hash. So hash, blocks, which are downloadable, 64K. 64K are 32 megs units of discovery. Units of discovery equal the content. Clear as mud?
What happens when your user B catches up to where user A is still at now 500 meg of a gig?
So what happens at that point, it goes to the data center. So hopefully there's a little bit of a speed thing happening there, but at that point it doesn't have the whole file and it continues to download from the data center at where it's reached. So your bandwidth now, yes, it's getting hit twice, but hopefully you didn't catch up. You got bigger issues there. So that's how we try to help you out. But the reason with that question, sir, we do the 64K because you reach your 250 meg, right? So instead of saying file not found, download canceled, file's not there, it just continues because it's got 250 megs of the file. So I've got X, so I'm just going to jump back up now. Lost contact. So you don't lose that download. That's why we don't broadcast an entire file. Otherwise, that scenario would break. Sir? So is there protection against two clients downloading the same file at the same time? So technically, in computer terms, that's very mathematically impossible if you really think about it, because computers work in milliseconds, right, in the downloads. So what happens is, if the hash file is generated, the file will go to the second, because one user technically, as with the way BranchCache works, one user will always be second based on the clock cycle. It's theoretically impossible. So if the hash is generated, it's going to get the hash, the second guy. It's going to do, but what's going to happen is the first guy got the file, generated the hash. He started the download. Now, 1 nanosecond later, that same guy accessed the file. The hash was generated. It doesn't take that long to generate the hash. But what's going to happen now, there's a little bit of a delay now, because now that user B, who's technically almost accessing the file at the same time, is going to get the hash. Now that, he's going to have to go do his broadcast. He's going to go look for a file, and maybe someone will respond, and at that point, it might only be a 64K download. Well, he's going to start downloading the same file now. So, the session's called Designing a BranchCache Infrastructure, so this really is not part of the design side of it. This is just getting into how the security side of it works. One thing, like I said previously, very, very important takeaway is BranchCache leverages your existing security infrastructure. If you have security holes today, example, you have no ACLs on any of your shares, you can't blame BranchCache, because BranchCache uses the same security you've implemented. So, if a user has to access a file and the user does not have ACL rights on that share, BranchCache content server will not give him a hash, because you don't have access to the share, so there's no way I'm giving you this hash. But if you leave that file share completely open and then wonder why BranchCache generated the hash, it wasn't a BranchCache issue. We honor whatever security you've implemented. If you have implemented no security, well, it's not going to work. So BranchCache is as strong or as weak as the security policies you've implemented. So whatever your environment is today without BranchCache, that's how it will work when you turn on that feature. But that being said, we have done a little bit of stuff in there. So what happens is, the way it works, and these are these little security IDs, and these security IDs are part of the hash. So you have a user that goes out and authenticates on a server and says, hey, I need a file. Server responds back with a bunch of hashes. Now, what I've been talking about is I've been saying, yeah, okay, he gets the hash, does a big broadcast out. What really happens is the client gets the hash, and then the client generates 2 more bits on that hash. It builds a private key and a public key. And it's that public key that it actually goes out and broadcasts. It doesn't broadcast the entire hash. What it does, it takes the data from the hash, rehashes it, and builds a private key. And then takes that private key, rehashes the private key, and builds a public key. Now, those 2 keys are built on the original hash structure, and then does a broadcast of the public key. Now, because the public key was built on the original hash structure, there's another client out there that actually responds to the public key and says, I understand your public key, it was built from this hash, so I'm going to send you the data. But I'm not going to tell you how to open that data, because if you know the public key, you probably generated a private key. And that private key was also generated from the original hash. And that's how we prevent people from just stealing data and saying, hey, I'm just going to try to intercept data. You can't. You don't have the private key. You never generated it. The owners of the hashes went and generated that key. And that's a little bit of protection we put in to help you on top of the security you've already implemented. But taking it a step further, getting back to what I talked about on the security side, if you really want to protect your environment, you do the BitLocker, you do the EFS, you put in your standard security policies on your machines as you would without BranchCache, and then we add this on top of it, this small little part to make sure the hashes aren't intercepted and how the private keys are generated. So, like I said, just revisiting what I said, cache only contains content requested by the client. Very important thing. A lot of questions I got this week. Does BranchCache work with DFSR? The answer is no. Why would you want it to? The whole purpose of bringing data to the branch and caching it is what you need. Now, why would you want to replicate that to another branch if they don't need that data? The branch should only have what it needs, what the user downloaded. Other important thing in distributed cache mode is a distributed cache mode client does not have other people's data. It has what it requested from the content server. So I requested file A, you requested file B, I never requested file B. So I'm not going to get this replication mechanism to put file B into my cache. It'll only, or on my drive, it'll only appear there if I requested it. It's a very important thing to say. So if you have a distributed cache environment, you can have different data on different caches because the users aren't doing the same thing. Accounting might be doing something, sales is doing something. There's no need to cross-replicate their caches. They don't need that data. Another security precaution to take. So data in cache is also ACLed. So we are respecting your security. Whatever you've implemented, we leverage it. We don't do anything new. And of course, with the hosted cache contains all data requested by branch users. So it's the hosted cache that has everything. Now, sir.
Is there any sort of way to pull information about what files were hashed so you can actually get insight into what the branch is actually using? Use that information for other things?
So I cover it in, I think, the next 2 slides when I talk about how we manage min and performance. So the question was, in case everyone didn't capture it, is there a way to find out what we're doing with the files, what's coming down, things like that, right? What's in the cache? Yeah. You can't look into the cache, but you can look at what's been going on in the environment. Because if you're looking into the cache, you're kind of seeing what's going on. You can't see the cache. But we'll talk about how you manage the environment. Another question that came up this week is, well, if I got SSL, this is not going to work. What's very important, this goes back to that diagram at the beginning where BranchCache sits. It's a platform, sits underneath everything. So when we look at the data, we're looking at it before you're sending it through the transport. SSL is the transport. It's right here. So the data going through is being encrypted. We're looking at it over here when it's sitting on your file server. So that's why BranchCache will work perfectly fine with an SSL environment, because we're not really encrypting anything, right? BranchCache is just on this end, the hash is generated, and now you're sending it through the SSL side and then onto the other side. Well, we honor that. Like I said many times today, we honor the security you've implemented. So we generate the hash when it's way up at the IIS level, hits HTTP, data still in the clear. When HTTP starts sending it, the data gets encrypted. But we've already done our job. And when it goes back through the channel, all that information is there. So I wrote down a couple of things. You'll probably have a lot more questions, but these are some of the ones that got repeated this week on BranchCache. So can the hosted cache be clustered? No. The hosted cache cannot be clustered today. Content servers can be clustered, but not the hosted cache. Where's the default location of the hosted cache? So when you deploy the policy from your data center and say, enable BranchCache hosted mode, well, where does it sit? It sits on your Windows partition. So wherever your Windows partition is, by default, it gets created there using 5% of the disk space. Now, that may work for you, it may not. So the very first thing you might do is you might not use 5%. When you enable the GPO for hosted cache mode, the default is 5. You might say, you know what? I know this is going to go sit on the Windows partition, so I'm going to set it to 1%. And as soon as it's created, I'm going to go to that server, net shell command, move the cache to D drive or wherever my drive is, and then set the cache to 25%. That would be the steps you would take. But default, go to the Windows partition. Can I clear the cache? Yes, common question. Net cache flush, bang. Very awesome scenario. If you start doing that stuff I was talking about, if you centralize one cache, SCCM, WS updates, AppV updates, file server, SharePoint, anything goes wrong, that command kills the cache, flushes it right out. I answered this before. Does hosted cache work with DFSR? No, it doesn't. What is the default time the content sits in the cache? So we prune the cache on a least recently used basis, whatever was, hasn't been used in a real long time. If you set the drive to 5% capacity, it's reaching its capacity. BranchCache, hosted cache says, hey, you haven't used any of these files? Delete, 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 starts deleting them. Or by default, even if you haven't reached the capacity of the drive, well, 28-day time limit is up, which is configurable. You can change that too. That's out of the box. We start deleting data. And last question, common question, can I generate or delete hash files? So I want to create those hashes for my shares. Answer is for files, yes. Why? Because that's static data. You can't do it on HTTP data because that could be fluid. You might be changing images all the time, and the hash gen utility would just keep running. So one thing administrators like to do is say, you know what, I'm going to create a file that uses this tool, hashgen, and that's the URL to get it if you download this file, or just do a search on Microsoft.com hashgen, and I'm just going to run it on these file shares. So this way, when the user comes in, the user's not generating the hash. I've already done it with them. The next question that comes up after this is, I can generate the hash, can I pre-populate the cache? Right now, there are no tools to do that, but there's no reason you can't. If you could write a script that says, you know what, I know my Salesforce needs to download the sales file every morning. I'm going to hash gen that file, and I'm going to write a script that causes it to be X opened, and that'll populate the cache. Or I know my salespeople always go into the centralized portal every morning, so I'm going to write a script off a machine that runs in the branch environment, hit that website, and by the time they come in the morning, content is cached. You can do that. We just haven't written any scripts to do it, but we have people that have done it. Customers, common scenario. So, you guys want to see how this works? Yes, no? So I have a really simple demo. Hi.
One question. You talked about file servers and web servers.
Yep.
But does it also work with proxies like Forefront TMG?
Yeah. TMG specifically, late last year, built an add-on for BranchCache. It shipped after the product shipped. So there is a TMG. I'm not sure if it's an out-of-band download, how they actually packaged it when it was sent. But yes, TMG and BranchCache for caching web data is a perfectly valid scenario supported by Forefront. So what I have here is one server and two clients. I've set up a distributed cache mode environment. So my server is running a WAN emulation product that we've developed internally for this product, running a 512K link with about, I think it was 40-second latency is what I had set it to. This is a file server, and it's a web server. You saw that I installed BranchCache. You saw that I installed the file services for BranchCache for the file side. I have two clients. I have client 1, and I have client 2. So what we're going to do here on the left-hand side is come up and open a website. Look at this area here. So basically, user A is coming up to download, accesses the portal, and says, hey, I need to do something. So there was a little bit of a delay there. Client 2 comes up. Did you notice a little bit of a difference? It's tough to do on that image, but there was a little bit faster because client 2 now pulled that image from my cache. He actually did all those things that I just told you, the get, do you have this ID? Yes, send it to me. So that image now went over to client 2. Client 1 says, I need to get the sales order form. I'm going to save it. I'll just save it onto my desktop. I downloaded it previously. So now I'm downloading a file over a 512 meg link. So what's happening? This is the standard user experience a lot of customers have. We don't have fastest bandwidth everywhere. So the first download is happening now. We'll wait a couple of seconds. We could use the music now. All right, I'm done. So it took me roughly 26 seconds. So my user 2 comes, whoops. User 2 comes in and says, I need my sales order form now, too. So let me save it. 1 second. Took it from the cache. All those diagrams, arrows I was showing you, that all happened on my little machine here with my VHD files. So you've seen how internet traffic works, HTTPS files. You've seen how downloads work, SMB files. So the last one I'll show you is training videos. So I'm going to go start mandatory training video as Microsoft employees have to do. 1, I have to suffer through watching the video. 2, I have to suffer through downloading it. So this is buffering. It's coming down, and the video starts. Well, my user 2 comes in and says, well, I got to watch the video too. No buffering, because I've cached it. Now think about that. Start adding all those numbers up now. As you go through all your users, all your branches, you saw the split-second difference. 26 seconds, 1 second. And now add that up. And it does save you a lot of money on your bandwidth. So what happens is, from our case studies, customers start reducing their bandwidth. Because I talked to you about optimization of traffic and not using traffic. We're on this side, not using traffic. So if you're not using bandwidth, then can you lower your bandwidth and save costs? And now go back to your leadership team and say, I know how I can save you money based on a platform I already know, most likely already own, using the security principles we've already implemented with no impact to users. That's your value prop you need to sell. So in wrapping up, what I've done on the last slide is thrown a lot of stuff up here for you to take away. Number 1, left-hand side, when you go onto the MSDN website and you're looking at the peer distribution stuff, here's the protocols. These are all the protocols that BranchCache leverages. How does it do content identification? How does it do discovery? These are the protocols. All of them are documented. Some of the collateral, the executive, the security guide, very important. The deployment guide, very important. So that covers a lot of the information in detail. The security guide is very, very deep. When I talked about the private thing and the public little thing, well, I think we covered that in about 50 pages in deep. Sir?
And we don't have to do anything to our SharePoint server to make that just happen.
Well, you have to put the BranchCache feature on.
Just turn it on.
Just turn it on. Yeah, that's it. Case studies are on there, a bunch of case studies. And the most important thing is send me an email. This goes to me. branchbg@microsoft.com comes right to me. Easier to give you branchbg, you'll remember it, or mcalra@microsoft.com. If you start doing some stuff, let me know. If you write that script, let me know. You're having problems, let me know. I'll help you out. So that's the end of my formal presentation. Forgot this. URLs are very long at Microsoft. www.branchcache.com goes right to all the data that you're looking for. All the information that on this website goes right to there. So thank you so much for your time today, and I'll take some questions. Can you just use the mic, please? One last thing, please, if you have some time. Fill out the survey and win some defibrillators, I think. I'm not sure what those are.
Quick question. So can a single server act both as a content server and a hosting server?
Well, no, because the hosted sits in the branch. Your content is where you're retrieving it from, so you're not going to retrieve from yourself.
No. I'm saying, let's just say you have 2 branch offices that want to share data as well.
Oh, so you're saying here goes to here?
Kind of like, well, we have an environment where we have a data center, data is being shared.
Yeah.
within the branch offices. But at the same time, some of the branch offices have certain files that are being shared amongst other branch offices. So that one, R2 server that we deploy at a branch office that's pulling data from the data center, can that R2 server also act as, a distribution server for another branch office?
Yep, because when you create the hosted cache, you're really just creating a file, is what you're doing. But you could take that server and you could install the BranchCache feature and then go into another share. It can't use that hosted cache unless there's a way for it to connect to it if it's the same data. I mean, it might be a better idea for those users to use that hosted cache if they're connected instead of enabling more files.
Yeah, I mean, it would be different data. It wouldn't be.
If it's different data, then yes. Yes.
I just want to make sure you can have both functions on that.
Yeah. And so that different data is not kept in the data center then?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So you would add the BranchCache feature the way I showed you on there, enable BranchCache for file services, and then basically those files would generate their own hashes and you would already have a cache. The only thing you'd have to look out for now, that server is doing a lot of things. It's serving up a lot of data and it's creating hash. So you might want to look at how you're going to spec that data server.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I think he's before me.
Yeah, a couple questions here. Is there a limitation on the number of clients that can be accessing a certain computer of some sort during hosted or distributed cache? Like, in the BranchCache for SCCM, if it's just a desktop, you're limited to 10 clients that can connect. Is this limitation also enabled here?
Nope, no limit. You need to start watching out when you hit that 100 user threshold in our testing, and you don't want to do peer-to-peer, because what happens with peer-to-peer is all those multicast, everyone's multicasting, right? So if you start getting to, 100 is our default on white paper guidelines. But if your users are doing a lot of stuff, your files are really big, you might have to take that down from 100 users. It really depends on your environment and the size of the files, the changes, how much broadcasting you're doing to find data. But no limitation that, okay, at 100 you're done.
In the case the cache gets full before the 28 days purging period, does it stop caching information or
starts deleting first in that hasn't been used.
FIFA. All right.
It automatically starts deleting.
All right. And if a file is deleted from a PC while the hash is still on the hosted server, on the hosted BranchCache,
it still stays. The hosted cache is hidden, and if you delete it, that it took it over, it doesn't delete, it doesn't replicate back a deletion.
How about the actual content? Does it still access the remote content to bring it down?
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry.
I think you may have kind of answered one of my questions. So have there been any scenarios with any of your customers where BranchCache has had the opposite effect and made things worse, speed-wise?
No, never.
Never?
Okay. Not that I know of, right? Because the one thing actually I forgot to mention is BranchCache is on the read path. It doesn't work on the write path. Very important thing to take away. The issues you're going to have to watch out for is like the gentleman here asked out, right? You have a file server, and then now you're going to be doing hosting information. So you have to factor that in on what the processor is going to be doing. You are going to be broadcasting information that you were not broadcasting before, the multicast, unicast. So you have to factor that in. Do you have the proper hardware? In some cases, I did mention that, hey, you should put the hosted cache in if you already have a server. Well, maybe if that was your Windows 2000 server, you kind of spec'd it differently. You just don't want to put, you might not even support it, but you have to watch out on the hardware side. Will it meet your needs? Even on the content servers, hash generation does not take a lot of stuff, a lot of time, CPU. But if you start doing some big things, big files, and you say, you know what, this is going to be my content server for a lot of things, my SharePoint, my files, and all this other stuff, and I'm going to run this hash generation script every hour because I know content is changing because we're in a dynamic environment right now, you're going to have to watch that server.
And I guess you were saying earlier, if we're set up for peer-to-peer, then we have to be careful about hitting a threshold of number of users because then we will see some negative impact.
That is something that might catch you off guard. If you're at 100 user mark and you can be at 100 user branch office and still use BranchCache distributed mode because your users are never there because it's a sales office. You could be at 200, your users are never there. But if you sit in a branch environment and the users are there with desktops and that's what you start doing, then yes. Then all of a sudden your network guys are going to kill you and say, dude, what are you doing on my network?
Right.
Why am I getting all these multicasts? And because they're limited by subnets, every single subnet now is doing multicast. What did you do to me by implementing this? Watch the network side and definitely work with the network guy.
And my other question was on Exchange. How does this work with Exchange messages and documents embedded within?
We don't support the Exchange database at this point.
Okay. So a document within a message is also not supported?
Yeah, not at this point. Yeah. A lot of things that we do were based on what we developed up front. The SMB, the HTTP, the applications I showed you. We didn't do MAPI
Okay.
at this point.
It's coming?
We're evaluating different workloads. There's a lot of feedback we've received. That's the number one piece of feedback. There's a lot of other things that we've, right now we're in development of other things that are going on. We're always, researching, and that is one of the things we're exploring, how we could do it.
Thanks.
Right here. Oh,
So if you have a TMG array,
Yeah.
and you enable BranchCache like host on that, how does that deal with the HA model? Because you said you can't cluster it, so is it aware?
nope. If you put it on TMG, so your TMG is in the branch, is where you put it there? Okay.
Right.
So you can put it on there on node 1, and when node 1 fails over, you'll have no hosted cache. Basically, that's what will happen, because it's not cluster aware to use shared disk.
So it would just have to regenerate the cache on
The
the
cache
remote.
would be regenerated.
Okay.
Well, the cache would not be regenerated. Sorry, let me take that back. Because your group policy, you have to set the fully qualified domain name of the server. And when that cluster fails over, unless it's got the same shared name, it should, right? But the fully qualified domain name on the network should be the same. The hash would have to completely be regenerated because it's not cluster aware. Now, what's going to happen is you are going to run into a little bit of trouble. I think this goes back to the other gentleman's problem, is you've got caches that are failing back and forth and are always out of sync. Because the cache will always, because what will happen is you've got the cache, the server failed, it failed over, it's got no cache, so none of this data applies. It's going to re-download everything. It's going to fail back over. Well, this data is invalid now because it's been changed. So it's actually going to cause you a little bit of a problem.
So is there any HA model at all or scenario?
Not for BranchCache at this point.
Okay.
Okay, so my question, based on what you've described, I think the answer is no, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Okay.
So is there any provisions for if you lose your WAN link, like some kind of offline mode? Because, I'm thinking it'd be great if, you lose your WAN link for a while.
Mm-hmm.
You get a request up from the file server, it's not there. Can you then ask,
Well, the problem
local
when
server?
the WAN link goes down is, if you remember, the very first thing it goes out and does a get and says, I need sales doc. And it says, I'm going to send you an ID.
So
How does it
there's no
send
way
you
to-
the ID?
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, because I have a branch office that's one computer,
Yeah.
VPN link, and it sometimes loses an XP, and I'm using offline files and folders, and I hate it.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to find something better, and I thought this would be perfect, except it sounds like it.
No.
You're saying it doesn't work at this point. And maybe
Not at
it
this
never
point,
will.
yeah.
So that's something to think about adding if you could.
All right. Well, that we have that feedback. Thank you, though.
I had a quick question
Yep.
on if you're doing load balancing, does it work with network load balancing?
Yep. The key, so if you put load balancers in front of what? What are you putting them in front of?
For example, like an F5.
Yeah, but what's behind it? What's behind the F5? Like web servers?
Yeah,
Okay.
SharePoint servers.
Yeah. So what happens is, if you remember my slide on the key, the private key and the public key, so what happens is that each one of these servers are going to create their own keys, right? But the data is technically the same. So there's a netshell command that actually aligns the keys. That's all you need to do. And then it'll work perfectly fine in front of load balancers. And if you go to branchcache.com, you'll see a link on there that says netshell commands, and it'll give you all of them for BranchCache.
if you have a WAN that is MPLS, so it is any to any,
Yeah.
and you have distribution points on all branch offices, can you configure some way that if a distribution points goes down on one branch office, it will go to distribution points on other branch offices? And can you configure it with the knowledge Active Directory has about the bonding speeds so that it can make a smart selection?
So the way BranchCache gets enabled is based on site. You put a site policy on it. So you'll do a GPO that says site A uses this branch server. Now what you're saying is that branch server dies, can these users flip over to this branch server on site 2? What you would have to do is an update to the policy. So you'd have to change the policy because the policy actually says make this guy a hosted cache server, and then in the policy to the clients, here is the branch server for this site you are going to resolve to. Now you'd have to update that policy to say, hey, that server died, maybe it's longer, going to take a real long time depending on the location, hardware has to be refreshed, rebuilt. So you could send a new policy down do a GPU update and say your hosted cache is this guy. That's how you'd have to do it. It wouldn't automatically fail over. There isn't a way right now to say, here is the pecking order of the BranchCache servers. If one goes down, peck 2, 3.
Can you explain how the underwater selection process is done for a client if there are more BranchCache distribution points? Does it give the list of all these distribution points, and then does it compare the IP address to the client IP address that is on the same network, and then?
It's not, it's AD site. So whatever clients, are you talking about a distributed cache mode? In distributed cache mode, it basically knows all the clients in the site in the GP policy. It says whoever's in this site, whenever you turn on the policy, set distributed branch cache to yes, you will take that policy, apply it to the objects in that site. Then all those guys are going to know that we are in distributed cache mode when I do my net broadcast, multicast. Now looking at IP, I know I'm in my site, I'm doing multicast, and I can't cross subnets. So whoever's in that site, who's also the objects in that OU that you set the policy, that's how they're working together.
I had one more I forgot to ask you.
Sorry,
Oh, no,
this
it's
room
okay.
is all over the place.
I know. So are you aware of any issues with like file system archiving programs like Enterprise Vault where you just have a shortcut to the actual file on the file system and the real content is stored on
We won't work with them
server?
unless they see the thing is BranchCache is just the underlying foundation is where we showed it. Then you've got the protocols and then the applications tie in the protocols which tie into BranchCache. That type of vendor would actually have to write that tie-in.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Would you run into a problem if someone in a branch office clicks on the shortcut? So would that mean basically it wouldn't be able to redirect and retrieve from the archive server? Or do I need to go talk to Symantec about this?
You know, I don't want to give you a yes and no because I haven't worked with it and we haven't tested it.
Okay.
We can talk to them together if you'd like.
Okay.
I'm going to be on the trade show floor in about a few minutes.
Okay, great.
That 32 meg chunk of data,
Yeah.
is that file specific, or is it just I have this hash, it could be any part of any file?
It's file specific. We take the content, chunk it into 32 megs, chunk it into 64, and then into the hash, so bang, straight down. Very file specific.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I don't think that one's on.
Well, in your first scenario, where you have user or sales guy at 7 a.m.
Uh-huh.
Sales guy at 9 gets the file, sales guy A. What if sales guy A decides that he finds a typo in the spreadsheet and then fixes the typo, sends it back to the file server? Is sales guy A computer getting the latest hash from that file?
No. So what happens is sales file, user A uploads the file now. The file's different because he added data into it. Now, what happened is when the file got overwritten, the hash is gone. The hash only gets generated on access of file or the hash gen utility. Now user B comes in and accesses the file, causes a new hash gen. User B now gets the new hash and actually has to download the file. Now user A goes and gets the file, will actually get the hash and get it off user B. It's the reversed, complete reverse what happened. Once you, at this point, what happens is the content, when you do content, chunks, download blocks, hash, they're all related. If you change the content, you've invalidated a bunch of sequences. So that whole hash is now gone. It's invalid. And that causes a new hash generation. Cool. I guess that's it. Well, thank you so much for your time.